The doctor's voice was calm, almost bored, when he said the words that ended Nora Callahan's life as she knew it. Severe bilateral tubal scarring. Conception is not likely. I'm sorry, Miss Callahan. She sat in the paper gown on the exam table for a long time after he left. The fluorescent light above her buzzed at a frequency that felt personal. She was 28 years old. She was a night shift nurse at St. Catherine's Medical Center. She had student loans and a second-hand piano in a studio apartment, and a mother who had been telling her since she was 16 that she was difficult to love. She did not cry. She had learned a long time ago that crying in front of white walls only made them look whiter. Her father was waiting outside in the hallway. She knew from the way he straightened when she came through the door that he had already been told. The clinic must have called him. She didn't know why that surprised her. He had always made sure to be the first to know everything that happened to her, and the last to care. Dr. Pearson spoke to me, he said, not unkindly, not cruelly either. Just the way he said most things, as though the words were items on a list he was reading aloud. Good, Nora said. Then I won't have to explain. Her father, Graham Callahan, commercial real estate developer, third-generation liar, put his hand on her elbow and walked her toward the elevator. She let him because she was still somewhere back in that exam room, still hearing the buzzing light. He didn't tell her the rest until they were in his car, parked outside the clinic with the engine running and the heat blasting even though it wasn't cold. There was a man, he said, a businessman. He had approached Graham 6 weeks ago about a contract, a very specific kind of contract, and Graham had said he needed time to think. He had spent those 6 weeks hoping Nora's situation would resolve differently. It hadn't, and the contract, Graham said, looking straight ahead through the windshield, was the only way out of a debt that would otherwise take the Callahan family name down entirely. His name is Donoghue, her father said. Lachlan Donoghue. Nora knew that name. Everyone in the city knew that name, the way they knew the names of earthquakes and power outages. Not because they wanted to, but because such things had a way of leaving marks. Lachlan Donoghue ran the Donoghue Group, which was publicly a private equity firm, and privately something that never appeared in news articles, but that everyone seemed to know about anyway. He was 41 years old. He had been widowed 3 years ago. He had 3 children, and he had, apparently, chosen her. Why, Nora said. It wasn't quite a question. Her father finally looked at her. He was very specific. He wanted someone from a respectable family, medical background, young but not inexperienced, and he said. Graham paused. He said he didn't want someone who would be angling for more children. He has 3. He doesn't want the complication. So her broken body was not a tragedy to Lachlan Donoghue. It was a qualification. Nora looked at her hands in her lap. The knuckles were rough from hospital-grade soap and cold water and 2 years of overnight shifts. She thought about her apartment and her piano and the 4 patients on her floor who had learned her schedule and waited up for her because she was the only one who remembered how they took their coffee. She thought about the debt her father had just described and what it would mean for her mother, who was difficult but who was still her mother. Give me the paperwork, Nora said. The Donoghue estate sat 40 minutes outside the city on a property that looked, from the gate, like something that had been built specifically to make people feel small. Stone walls, iron gates, an approach road lined with old oaks that had been growing there longer than the country had been a country. Nora rode up that road in the back of a black car with her one good suitcase on the seat beside her, and told herself she was walking into a patient's home, not her own. She had done harder things. She had coded a 19-year-old at 3 in the morning and kept working when the attending called it. She had sat with a woman in her final hour and held her hand and not looked away. She could manage a cold house and a cold man and 3 children who would probably hate her on sight. She was not prepared for what 3 children who hated you actually looked like. They were standing in the front foyer when the housekeeper, a stout woman named Mrs. Dre, who communicated primarily through the angle of her eyebrows, showed Nora inside. 3 children in descending height like a warning. The oldest was a boy, maybe 13 or 14, dark-haired and long-limbed, with his arms crossed and his jaw set in an expression that Nora recognized from the adolescent wing at St. Catherine's, the look of someone who has been hurt enough times to decide that offense is the only viable defense. The middle one was a girl, perhaps 10, who stood very straight and looked at Nora with the specific expression of someone evaluating a structural flaw. The youngest was a boy of about 7 who was standing slightly behind his sister, with his fingers curled into the back of her sweater and his eyes very large and very dark and focused on Nora with an intensity that was almost unbearable. There was a 4th person in the room. Lachlan Donoghue was not what she had expected, and she had expected something formidable. He was tall, dark-suited, with the kind of stillness that came not from calm but from absolute control. The stillness of something that had learned to stop moving so it wouldn't break what was around it. He had a scar along his jaw that his collar almost covered. He looked at her with grey eyes that gave away precisely nothing. "Miss Callahan," he said. "Mr. Donoghue," she said, a pause that lasted exactly long enough to be uncomfortable. "These are my children," he said. "Fen, Margot, and Owen." The oldest, Fen, didn't move. Margot gave a small, performative nod. Owen did not stop staring. Nora looked at them. "Hi," she said. No one said hi back. It was, she thought, a completely honest beginning. Her room was large and cold in the way that rooms in old stone houses are cold, not from lack of heat, but from memory. The walls remembered winters. Nora unpacked her suitcase methodically, the way she organized her supply cart at the hospital, everything in its place, everything visible, nothing wasted. She put her nursing textbooks on the shelf and her spare stethoscope on the dresser and her photograph. The only one she'd brought, herself and her grandmother at a beach in South Carolina when Nora was 6, on the nightstand. She did not sleep much. At 2 in the morning she gave up and went downstairs for water and found Owen sitting on the kitchen floor with a flashlight and a book about deep-sea fish. He looked up at her. She looked down at him. "You can't sleep either," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," she said. He considered this. "Mrs. Dre snores," he said. "You can hear it through the vents." "I didn't hear that," Nora said. "I was just thinking too loud." Owen looked at this new information with the same seriousness he appeared to apply to everything. "What were you thinking about?" "Anglerfish," she said, nodding at his book. "The deep-sea ones, where the male fuses to the female's body and they become one organism." Owen stared at her. "You know about anglerfish. I know about a lot of things," Nora said. "I'm a nurse." She got her water. She sat down on the floor beside him. Not asking, not announcing, just sitting. And he shifted over 2 inches to give her room and turned his book so she could see the pictures. They sat like that for 40 minutes, the flashlight making a small warm world of the 2 of them on the cold kitchen floor. And he explained the entire book to her as though she hadn't already known most of it, and she listened as though she hadn't. When he finally started falling asleep mid-sentence, she walked him upstairs and tucked him in, and didn't think about the fact that she was doing it until she was already back in her own room. She thought about it for a while after that. Fen didn't speak to her for the first 2 weeks. He was efficient about it. He would leave a room as she entered it, time his appearances at meals, so that he arrived after she sat down and left before she finished. Conduct himself with the concentrated deliberateness of someone who was making absolutely certain. She understood that he knew she was there and had decided she wasn't worth acknowledging. She let him. She had triaged enough people to know that the loudest rejection was rarely the most serious wound. Margot was different. Margot watched. Nora noticed it on the 4th day, when she was reviewing medication schedules with Mrs. Dre in the hallway and felt eyes on her back. She turned and Margot's was at the end of the corridor, 10 years old, and utterly self-possessed, studying Nora with the expression of a scientist observing a variable. "Do you need something?" Nora asked. "No," Margot said. "Okay," Nora said, and went back to the medication schedules. On the 6th day, Margot appeared in the doorway of the small study where Nora had set up a desk. "What are you doing?" Nora said, not looking up. "Documenting things I need to remember." "Like what?" Mrs. Dre's blood pressure. Owen's sleep schedule. The noise the radiator makes on the second floor that I think is a valve problem and not a ghost. She paused. Fen takes his coffee black, but he adds sugar when he thinks no one's looking. Silence. You noticed that, Margot said. I notice everything, Nora said. It's a professional requirement. Margot came 2 steps further into the room. Mrs. Dre said you're a nurse. I am not a housewife of. No, then why are you here? Nora put down her pen and looked at the girl. Margot's was 10 years old and standing with her shoulders squared and her chin lifted, and she was asking the only honest question anyone in this house had asked her since she arrived. Nora thought she deserved an honest answer. It's complicated, Nora said, but I'll tell you this much. I'm not here to replace anyone. I'm not here to pretend, and I'm not going anywhere just because it's uncomfortable. Margot held her gaze for a long moment. Then she went and sat in the chair across from Nora's desk and pulled out her own homework and said nothing further for the rest of the afternoon. It was the best conversation Nora had had in 2 weeks. She saw Lachlan Donoghue at breakfast and at dinner, and occasionally in the corridor at hours that suggested neither of them slept as much as they should. He was always impeccably dressed, even at 6 in the morning. He moved through his own house the way he moved through everything, with absolute precision, leaving the minimum possible trace, like a man who had spent a long time making sure he could disappear quickly if he needed to. He asked about the children when they spoke. He asked about Owen's sleep and Margot's schoolwork, and whether Fen had eaten anything at lunch. His questions were precise, and his face, while he listened, was entirely still. She answered them with equal precision. She did not editorialize. She did not tell him that Owen was sleeping better, since she started leaving a small light on in the hallway. She did not tell him that Margot had started leaving her homework spread across Nora's desk in the afternoons and working there in silence, or that this was the most companionable thing Nora had experienced in recent memory. She did not tell him any of it because she didn't know yet what he would do with the information. On the 18th day, he stopped her in the corridor outside the library. Fen had a nightmare last night, he said. She waited. He didn't come to me, Lachlan said. The 3 words were completely flat, but she heard what was underneath them. She had listened to enough patients describe pain to know how people sounded when they were describing something that hurt too much to name directly. He came to me, she said, a pause. What did you do? Sat in the doorway, she said. He didn't want me in the room. I didn't go in the room. I stayed in the doorway until he fell back asleep. Lachlan Donoghue looked at her for a moment with those grey eyes that gave away nothing. Thank you, he said. I'm a nurse, she said. It's what I do. He nodded once and walked past her down the corridor, and she stood there for a moment, thinking about the way his voice had sounded when he'd said Fen didn't come to me. Like a man describing a wound he'd already accepted would never fully close. She didn't mean to hear them arguing. She had come downstairs for her second cup of coffee at 7:15 and stopped in the hallway when she heard Fen's voice raised in a way she hadn't heard before. Not cold, not controlled, but ragged at the edges. The voice of someone who was running out of infrastructure. You brought her here because it was convenient, Fen was saying. You always do what's convenient. Mum wasn't convenient, so you worked late every night and then she was gone and you… Fen. Lachlan's voice was very quiet. Don't do the quiet voice. I'm not 7. I know what it means when you go quiet. A long silence. I made mistakes, Lachlan said. His voice was still quiet, but it had changed texture. It was the voice of someone who was not defending himself. I made a lot of mistakes, and I can't give you back the time I didn't give you. I know that. Then why is she here? Fen said. Why bring someone else in? Like we're a problem you're solving. You are not a problem, Lachlan said. You are the only things in my life that have ever mattered. Silence. Then act like it, Fen said. Nora went very quietly back to the kitchen and waited 10 minutes before coming downstairs again, making more noise this time. She thought about what Fen had said for the rest of the day. She thought about it with the particular precision she brought to symptoms that didn't quite add up. Not jumping to conclusions, Not treating the surface presentation, but sitting with the information and letting it arrange itself into something true. The children weren't grieving their mother's absence alone. They were grieving their father's. He was still here. He had just stopped being reachable. She found him in his study that evening. The door was open, which she had learned meant visitors were tolerated. She knocked anyway. "I need to talk to you about the children," she said. He set down his pen. He looked at her with the expression she was starting to recognize as his equivalent of paying attention, not warmth exactly, but presence, a focused stillness. "Fen doesn't need someone to sit in his doorway," she said. "He needs you to do it. He needs you to be someone who shows up at 3 in the morning and stays outside the door without being invited in. He's 13. He's not going to ask for it." "That doesn't mean he doesn't need it." Lachlan said nothing. "Margot needs someone to argue with," she said. "She's been running the household emotionally since she was 7 because she decided someone had to and there was no one else available. She needs to be able to have opinions that someone pushes back on. She needs to be a child." Still nothing, but he was listening. She could feel it the way she could feel a patient's attention in the dark during a long shift. A particular quality of stillness that meant someone was taking in everything you said and holding it somewhere carefully. "Owen is fine," she said. "Owen is 7 and resilient and he likes anglerfish and he will probably be okay, but the other two—" She stopped. She looked at him directly. "They lost their mother, but you were still here and they lost you too. And I can sit in doorways and I can let Margot do her homework on my desk and I can talk about anglerfish at 2 in the morning, but I cannot be what you need to be to your own children. That part is yours." The silence lasted a long time. "I don't know how," he said. It was the first completely honest thing he had said to her in 18 days of living in the same house. She heard it for what it was, not an excuse, not a deflection. A fact. A man who had built an empire of control and precision, and who had arrived at the edges of his own children's grief and found that none of it was any use. "You don't have to know how," she said. "You just have to stay in the doorway." Things shifted after that, not dramatically. There was no single scene, no breakthrough moment she could point to and say this was when. It was more the way a season changed, imperceptibly, and then all at once. Lachlan started coming to breakfast instead of eating in his study. He was terrible at small talk. His attempts at it were so visibly painful that Margot started cataloguing them with quiet satisfaction. Nora could see the girl logging each failed conversation attempt like data, and she suspected that Margot's continued presence at the breakfast table had more to do with the entertainment value of watching her father fumble than with any thawing of her defenses. But she was there. She stayed. Owen had started, sometime around week 3, to leave small offerings outside Nora's door. An interesting pebble. A printout of an article about bioluminescent organisms. Once, memorably, a drawing of an anglerfish that was anatomically detailed in a way that suggested he had done real research and also had spent at least an hour on the teeth. Fen was harder. She caught him in the kitchen one evening when she was making tea, and he had come in for what she suspected was the sole purpose of leaving if she was there. She didn't look up from the stove. "I was 22 the first time someone I was responsible for died," she said. A pause. She heard him not leave. "She was 74, Nora said. "She came in with pneumonia, which was manageable, and then something changed at 3 in the morning, and we coded her for 42 minutes, and at the end of it the attending looked at me and I knew." She stirred the tea. "I sat in a supply closet afterward for about 15 minutes. Then I went back out because there were 4 other patients." She turned around. Fen was standing by the counter with his arms crossed, but something in his posture had changed. The careful architecture of his defensiveness had shifted slightly. The way a wall shifts when something on the other side of it is putting pressure on it. "I'm not trying to tell you that your thing is like my thing," she said. "I'm not. Your mother dying when you were 10 is not the same as a patient dying when you're a nurse. I just—" She stopped. "I thought you might want to know that I'm not someone who turns away from hard things and expects them to get easier." Fen looked at her for a long moment. "She liked music," he said suddenly. My mom, she played piano. We got rid of the piano when she died because my dad said. He stopped. He said it was too hard to have it there. Nora thought about her own piano in her studio apartment, which she had left behind. She thought about the way Fen had just used the past tense like it cost him something to say it. I play piano, she said. Fen looked at her. I'm not as good as I used to be, she said. But I play. He left without saying anything else. But he didn't leave quickly, and he looked back once from the doorway. 2 weeks later, there was a piano in the front room. She didn't ask where it had come from. She found Lachlan in the hallway near it, standing with his hands in his pockets, looking at it as though it was something that required diffusing. Fen told me you played, he said. I do, she said. He hasn't said a voluntary thing to me in 3 years, he said. And last week he walked into my office and said. He stopped. The muscle in his jaw worked. He asked if we could get a piano. Nora looked at the piano. It's a good one. It's the best one I could find on 3 days' notice, Lachlan said, and there was something in his voice she hadn't heard before, not control, not precision, but something rawer, something that was trying to be and not quite making it. Will you play it? He said. She sat down and played Debussy's Clair de Lune, which was the piece her grandmother had taught her when she was 8, and which she had never forgotten, even in the years when she had no piano to play it on. She played it slowly because she was rusty, and without any flourish because she had no interest in performance. When she finished, she looked up. All 3 children were on the stairs. Fen was sitting. Margaux was standing 1 step above him with her hand on the railing, and Owen was pressed against his sister's arm with his eyes very bright. Lachlan was in the doorway. He looked at Nora with those grey eyes, and she looked back at him, and for the first time since she had come into this house, she couldn't quite identify what was on his face, but she knew, with the certainty she brought to the things she knew, that it was real. The attack came on a Thursday evening. She was in the kitchen with Owen when Mrs. Dray came in white-faced from the front hall, and then there were sounds she recognized from the worst nights at St. Catherine's. The sounds of a situation deteriorating faster than anyone was managing it. She had Owen upstairs and in his room and the door locked before she let herself think. Because that was triage. Move the non-critical first, secure the environment, then assess. She found Lachlan in the front hall with 2 men she had never seen, and a 3rd man who had a gun, and the specific look of someone who had decided that the negotiation phase was over. She heard Fen's voice from somewhere. He had come downstairs, she realized with a cold clarity. And then everything happened very quickly, in the way that bad things in hospitals happened quickly, telescoping into a series of decisions with no time between them. She put herself between Fen and the man with the gun. She did it automatically, the way she moved between patients and falling equipment, without a risk calculation, because there wasn't time for one. She heard someone shout her name. She was startled briefly to realize it was Lachlan's voice and that he said it the way people said names when they were afraid. She felt something graze her left shoulder, and then the room was moving in a way that wasn't quite right, and she had the very clear thought, clinical and calm, that she needed to stay upright for another 60 seconds. She made it 53. She woke up in what turned out to be the estate's 3rd-floor bedroom that had been converted, while she was unconscious, into something approximating an ICU suite. There was an IV in her arm. There was a cardiologist she had never met sitting in the chair beside the bed, who introduced himself as Dr. Whitfield and explained, with admirable concision, that she had a graze wound on her left shoulder and a concussion from the fall, and that she was going to be fine. "The children," she said. "Safe," said a voice from the doorway. Lachlan Donoghue was standing there, looking like a man who had been awake for the last 36 hours, which was, she learned later, exactly accurate. He was in a shirt that was missing a button. His hair was wrong. He looked, for the first time since she had met him, like a man who did not have everything under control, and it made him look entirely different. More real. Somehow, the way a city looked more real in the rain. "I told you to leave," he said, "when it started. I told you to go upstairs." "I saw Fen," she said. "He was behind me." He came into the room. He sat in the chair the cardiologist had vacated. He looked at her for a long time with an expression that she still didn't have a name for, but that she was beginning to understand was simply the expression that Lachlan Donoghue wore when he had run out of infrastructure. "You put yourself between my son and a gun," he said. "Yes," she said. "Why?" She thought about it. She thought about it the way she had thought about the other things that had happened in this house, carefully, without rushing, letting the truth arrange itself. "Because he's mine," she said. "They're all mine. I know that's not." She stopped. "I know that's not what we agreed. But I've been here for 6 weeks, and Owen brings me fish facts, and Margot does her homework on my desk, and Fen asked for a piano, and I play Debussy on Thursday nights, and—" She stopped again. "They're mine. I don't know what else to call it." Lachlan looked at her. "I have been afraid," he said carefully, "for a long time, of getting things wrong. He stopped. He was not a man who said things he hadn't finished thinking yet, and she could see him working against that now, pushing through it. "I was afraid that anything I let matter to me I would lose, the way I lost their mother, so I stopped. Letting things matter." "I know," she said. "I could tell, I couldn't tell," he said, "that it was that obvious." "I'm a nurse," she said. "People are always trying to hide how much they're hurting. I'm very good at seeing it anyway." He reached out and, very carefully, covered her hand with his. She felt the warmth of it and the deliberateness of it, the way he did everything, with absolute precision. Only now the precision was in service of something that had nothing to do with control. "This was supposed to be a contract," he said. "I know," she said. "It isn't anymore. It hasn't been for a while." He stopped. "I want you to stay. Not the contract, you. I want you to stay because my children are yours, the way you said, and because I—" Another pause, and she watched him cross what was clearly a significant interior distance, "because I don't want to lose you, and I am aware, given my track record, of how inadequate that statement is." Nora looked at him. She looked at him for a long time. "Don't lose me then," she said. The wedding was small, by Donoghue standards, which meant 60 people and flowers that had been flown in from somewhere. Margot, who had opinions about everything by this point and had been expressing them freely for 2 months, had chosen the arrangement herself and delivered a 15-minute presentation to Nora about the symbolic significance of the blooms, during which Nora had taken notes because Margot was 10 years old and delivering a 15-minute presentation about floriography, and this was remarkable and worth documenting. Fen walked her down the aisle. He had asked to, and she had said yes without hesitation, and he had spent the 2 weeks leading up to the ceremony pretending this was not a significant thing by being extremely rude about the music she chose, which she accepted as his love language and was grateful for. Owen was the ring-bearer. He had practiced for the entire preceding week with a level of commitment that was, she thought, the most serious thing she had ever witnessed. And he carried out the role with the expression of someone who understood that they were participating in a gravitational event, which, Nora thought, watching his small, serious face as he walked toward her, they were. Lachlan looked at her at the end of the aisle with those grey eyes, and they were no longer giving nothing away. They were giving everything away. He was terrible at hiding things now. She had discovered over the last 2 months, not in a sloppy way, but in the way of a man who had decided that hiding things had not served him and who was methodically, deliberately learning a different way. She thought about the exam room with the buzzing fluorescent light. She thought about her father's face in the car, and the way the words contract and convenient had felt like a diagnosis. She thought about the night she had slept on a cold kitchen floor with a 7-year-old who knew everything about anglerfish. She thought about how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you opens the door to the room where your life was waiting. "Hi," she said to Lachlan when she reached him. He smiled. It was not a polished smile, and it rearranged his whole face when it came, and it was entirely real. "Hi," he said.